Well, good afternoon, everybody. Sorry I'm running a couple minutes late. That voting thing we have to do. It is. I'm glad you're joining me. I hope everybody had a pretty good August. It does feel like kind of the first week back at school as the Senate comes back into session, and we're going to obviously have a very busy September. Thought I'd give you a little bit of a recap of some of my August activities, a couple of recent announcements, and at least some of the issues that I know we're going to be confronting over the next 2 to 3 weeks. First of all, I got one more time reminded of the enormous size of the Commonwealth of Virginia. During my August travels, we did a 1 week where we started in Northern Virginia doing an announcement at Dulles Airport about the largest public-private airport-based solar energy installment that will both be a calling card, because anybody landing at Dulles in the future years will see this solar array. It's got enormous power to power literally, I've not forgotten the number, but like 30,000 homes will end up being powered by this investment at Dulles. Then went down to far southwest Virginia. I did fly on this case instead of drive, down to Wise County and worked my way from Wise County all across Southwest, all across Southside, into Hampton Roads, and then even up to Newport News, and over 500 miles. So it was a busy number of days on the road. I guess the couple of takeaways that I found is I generally found people candidly more optimistic than kind of what is being reported sometimes out of the national press. I had huge interest in broadband. No matter where the community was, the idea of the need to have broadband, and I tried to make the point, we got $700 million from the Northam administration of both federal and state funds. We've got a $1.4 billion grant that we were able to achieve from the infrastructure bill. Senator Kaine and I just announced $16 million in middle mile funding this past week, and that was 12 counties and includes Cumberland, Dinwiddie, somebody's handwriting I can't read. We will send the 12 counties out, and if any, I think that's been in one of the press releases that went out. But the point I made repeatedly was, if we don't have 95, 98% of Virginia with full high-speed broadband at an affordable rate over the next 2 to 3 years, it's going to be a failure of execution. And I did hear in some communities where there were concerns that somebody who might have gotten the broadband contract a year or so ago were not proceeding at a pace. And I'm going to be in touch with the folks at the state level and the federal level, making sure we execute and making sure the state's programs that are responsible for the execution do appropriate oversight is really important. So that was a takeaway. Another takeaway, and I pointed out that if you look at the 3 big bills that are now law, the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS bill, and the the energy changes, at least, that came out of the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, enormous positive actions coming out of those bills, those laws, but only about 10 to 15% of the money in each of those entities has actually hit the street yet. So the benefit of these new laws are really going to hit Virginians over the next 12, 18, 24 months. I think that's good news. It also, in my mind, begs the fact that if we're going to do all these things, we got to build stuff again in this country. We got to build infrastructure. We need to build advanced manufacturing around semiconductor chips. If we're moving towards advanced energy, we need to install solar or deal with small modular nuclear or a host of other things. And that means we need regulatory reform. And I was pleasantly surprised, from rural areas to urban areas, conservative areas to progressive areas, that people get the fact that it shouldn't take 3 to 5 years in America to get permits to build anything. And that was something that was a bit unexpected. I also, as somebody who spent a lot of time recently on looking on how we can get small modular nuclear reactors and how trying to work with the governor on this, we can make Virginia a leader in SMRs. A lot of interest in that subject across the Commonwealth, recognizing It's clean energy. There's ways to make it absolutely safe, and there's not even the kind of footprints that sometimes push back, for example, on solar deployments. So it was a great trip. Second piece I wanted to raise was that while we're back in session at this point, we know there are some in the House who are once again threatening a government shutdown. That's crazy. What's particularly crazy, and I can't imagine anybody that says it's all right, is you shut down the government. Some of the advocates of shutting down the government are saying it doesn't matter. I would ask them, do you not realize that we passed laws that said if there's a government shutdown after the crazy one that lasted 35 odd days under President Trump, we're going to make sure federal employees are paid regardless. So not only do you disrupt people's lives, it actually costs the taxpayer a lot more money if we're going to honor that law. So I'm very proud of the fact the Senate in a bipartisan way is working through the appropriation issues. We're going to do our job. It's my high hope that the House will do the same. There is no state in the country that gets hit harder than Virginia, from our federal installations to our major military installations to the notions of air traffic controllers who disproportionately bear burdens and cutting back on our ability to travel. This doesn't make sense for the country. Sure as heck doesn't make sense for the Commonwealth of Virginia to see a shutdown. Coming up on the end of the month as well is there's other legislation. I've been very active, as I think everybody knows, on the FAA reauthorization. There's things like drone, in terms of allowing our country to move forward on safe deployment of drones, but at the same time making sure that we have a smoothly and safe functioning air system. And obviously the issue that Senator Kaine and I and the whole delegation has been on, let's not have Congress try to micromanage the region's airports around our nation's capital. And we are unsure whether we'll get the full FAA reauthorization or just an extension of the existing law. We do need a reauthorization, but we ought to not include micromanaging the flights out of Nashville and Dulles, and very, very proud of the Virginia delegation on a bipartisan basis, how they stepped up in the House and made sure that those efforts to micromanage by the House were overturned. And then finally, something that I'm, as chairman of the Intelligence Committee, am intimately involved in, and that is making sure that we stand with our European allies and with the brave men and women in Ukraine who are pushing back against Vladimir Putin and the illegal Russian invasion of their nation. We'd like to have seen quicker progress, but literally on a daily basis, the Ukrainians are making strides forward. We must remain steadfast with them. The rest of the world is watching us. If those who were critical, as I was, of how we got out of Afghanistan, if we were to suddenly pull the plug on Ukraine at this moment in time, America's commitment to our allies and our commitments to our treaties, because while Ukraine is not a NATO nation, we are working in close concert with all our NATO allies, who in many cases are actually sending more aid per capita than we are in the United States. We've got to hang in with President Zelensky and the brave Ukrainians who are fighting the Russians. And this moment in time, this additional funding that we need is critically, critically important. And I would point out one of the things that I hear again from some members, disproportionately House Republicans, who somehow want to just give up. They somehow act like there's no linkage between the circumstances of what's playing out in Ukraine between Ukraine and Russia and the rise of China. If the best gift that America could give to Xi Jinping in terms of his efforts to try to spread Chinese Communist Party domination, not only around Asia, but around the world, or for that matter, Xi Jinping's aspirations to retake Taiwan, would be if America walked away from a similar conflict in terms of helping our Ukrainians against Russia. I do not understand anyone's failure to see that linkage. In the Senate, the vast majority of members of both parties, at least anyone who is in a leadership position on committees like the Appropriations Committee, the the leadership of the Senate Majority and Minority Leader, the Intel Committee, the Armed Services Committee, folks who have followed this and have been informed on both a public and classified basis of the progress of what's going on. We need to stand with our Ukrainians now more than ever. Remember, the Ukrainians are doing what America had prepared literally for 75 years to do, which was to take down the second, at least through most of my lifetime, the world's second biggest military force was the Soviet Union / Russia. Well, now the Russian military is in many ways the second best, even just within Ukraine, since the Ukrainians have, in certain ways, are performing better than the Russians. They are doing the job that in many ways for 75 years America prepared to do. Again, critically important that we get this supplemental assistance to our Ukrainian allies, and as well as reaffirming America's commitment to our alliances around the world. Why don't I stop there, and Laura, turn it over to you, Laura, and be happy to take some questions.
And our first question will be Lori with the Washington Post. Lori? Okay, we're going to move on to Jackie DeFusco with Hearst Media. Jackie? Moving on, we're going to do Alexia Stanbridge with WSET.
Hi, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we have you.
Okay, so there's been the 14th Amendment. Should it be the voters' decision since Trump has never actually been charged?
Again, you cut out through almost all of that, and I hope we're making sure that people can ask their questions. I've heard that I think it's Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. I have to say at the front end, I went to law school, but I never practiced a day of law, so I am not the constitutional scholar. That part of those provisions, if you are, I believe, convicted of the notion that you were part of a conspiracy against the United States, that could preclude further service in public office. I'm not going to weigh in on the legal arguments there, and obviously former President Trump will have his day in court. He deserves the presumption that any American will have going into a trial, or should I say a series of trials now, I think 90 plus indictments in total with 4 or 5 trials. Let's see how that plays out. I'm not going to weigh in on the specifics of the 14th Amendment argument. I'll leave that to legal scholars, but clearly there will be people, if there are convictions, there will be people raising that issue.
And just a reminder, when you're asking a question, take yourself off speakerphone and use your handheld. It'll be helpful with our connection. Our next question will be Rashad Hudson with Nexstar.
Hi, Senator. Thank you for your time. I wanted to get your reaction to some of your Republican colleagues are planning to vote on a bill to ban the federal government from issuing a mask mandate. What is your reaction to that? Is there any worry that the federal government may issue any type of mask mandate?
To me, it sounds like another effort at political theater. I think we ought to defer to public health experts. I think most folks, even where we've seen uptakes in COVID, I think a lot of those decisions are being made on a local basis. I read some stories today. And I think, again, let's let the public health experts decide. Let's have that be the decision point, not some uniform one-size-fits-all. Either way, I don't think at this moment in time there ought to be a universal mandate, but the notion as well of somehow banning what might be in the public health interest is hopefully not a direction we're going to head.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator, our next question will be Felicity Taylor with CBS 19.
Hi, Senator. What can you do over the next 23 days to avoid a shutdown?
Well, first and foremost, what I can do is make sure the Senate passes what's called a continuing resolution which will keep the government operating, and whether it's to the first week or second week of November, or whether it's the first week of December, frankly, in terms of that, I would go with any of the above to make sure we don't do a shutdown, number one. Number two, continue to make the case that a shutdown would be stupidity on steroids, particularly for Virginia, because of our concentration of federal employees, our concentration of military employees, concentration of government contractors, both military and otherwise, folks who enjoy our national parks. It's, the list goes on, and remind people who somehow might say, well, it doesn't really matter. Well, the law of the land is that if you do a shutdown and then you reopen, you still got to back pay all the federal employees. So tell me the business case. Why disrupt people's lives? Why cost the American taxpayers more? For what? Particularly when some of the issues that are being raised are not relevant to this discussion. And candidly, again, it's like the fact was that the Speaker of the House, the President, came up with a deal to avoid the debt ceiling crisis. And now we got folks reneging on the deal. And the same people who seem to want to renege on the deal are many of the same voices who say, well, you know what, we shouldn't be involved in Ukraine anymore, and let's renege on our commitment to the Ukrainians. Let's renege on our at least commitment with our fellow NATO allies. And I'd point out, one of my colleagues, Republican colleague, brought up today, back in 1994, Ukraine was the third largest nuclear power in the world. It was Soviets, America, and Ukraine was number 3. There was a deal made, of which the United States is a signatory, that had Ukraine give up all its nuclear weapons in 1994 with the agreement that its territorial integrity would be maintained. Obviously, Russia reneged on that deal, and I can't believe, again, that there are American legislators who want to renege on what was our commitment back in 1994, which would also go to the question of, can you trust America long haul? Now, I know you talked about shutdown, but I think I think it's really important that we get this Ukrainian aid. We get the disaster aid. Obviously, I should have mentioned that as well. We've seen our fellow Americans in Hawaii and Florida and flooding elsewhere that needs to be dealt with. That is our commitment to fellow Americans. And I just, I think the more we make the case, that I'm going to do this as much as I can publicly, that people will get it. And again, what I can't imagine is, if you had a secret ballot in the House of Representatives, or if you didn't have rules that say, if you went back to the way the House used to work, is, all right, we're going to put up something, and as long as you get a majority, it might be 80% of the Republicans and 95% of the Democrats. That still will get you, 75% plus or 80% of the whole House. And that would be the amazing thing. If you did a secret ballot in the House, I bet it would be 85% plus that would say we shouldn't shut down the government. But you got this small group of individuals, and I'm not sure that I don't know, and that's why Speaker McCarthy, I think, in his effort to get this job, boy, oh boy, at some point he's going to have to break with some of these folks who tend to want to, put politics over what I think is in the best interest of our country.
Senator, our next question will be Amy Knowles with the Virginia Dogwood.
Hey, Senator Warner, thanks for taking our questions. I know that you've been a big champion for broadband expansion for years, and as you're seeing more and more communities get access to reliable broadband services, what are some of the impacts that you're seeing that have across Virginia?
I've heard all kinds of individual stories. I think I was in Botetourt a while back, and somebody who'd started an online business and during COVID, a lot of consulting and otherwise from the home. They said, Nirvana, suddenly I can do this, not from the Hardee's parking lot, but I can do this at home, and this is a way I can help be at home for my kids, but still run a business and live. She said in one of the prettiest places. There's a lot of pretty places in Virginia. She was in Botetourt. I talked about the communities down in Southside. I was in South Hill. And real concern that some of the communication from the entity that the the community or county had contracted with, they weren't getting up-to-date reports. That's why the oversight of making sure that these dollars get spent out well is really important. I mean, we've been doing broadband in small investments literally since the 90s. And a lot of those dollars, candidly, didn't go that far, and we didn't have very good oversight. So, making sure we have oversight is something that I think is critically important over these next 2 to 3 years. The Middle Mile project I just talked about that Senator Kaine and I got $16 million for, and the 12 communities that, without glasses, I can't read off, that are, again, mostly Southside communities. That middle mile is really important. And I give the legislature, the state legislature credit. We allowed, unlike a lot of other states, we allowed our major utilities to help provide that broadband, because they oftentimes have the right-of-ways for the middle mile. Mid-Atlantic Broadband, something that came, an entity that came together while I was governor back in the early 2000s, a co-op that is building out broadband for that, not that last mile, but the connections between counties, not only a South Side, but now going across the Eastern Shore. They received a lot of that funding on the middle mile. So there is huge interest. There's a lot of folks. I met with farmers in Grayson County. They weren't just from Grayson, but a lot of them were from Grayson. Most of them didn't have access to broadband. They said how that can improve their ability to farm, their ability to actually, offer a future for their kids or others. Many of those farmers were getting older. Broadband doesn't guarantee the future of the family farm, but failure to have broadband makes it a heck of a lot harder for the next generation to do farming and have that lifestyle they want in agricultural communities. So I think this is, again, not going to solve every problem, but the absence of broadband will exponentially increase the challenges that a community faces. And thank goodness we've now got all the resources we need. We just got to execute and make sure this becomes a reality.
Senator, our next question will be Danielle Sandler with WVNS.
Hi, good afternoon, Senator. You might have already answered my question from an earlier reporter, but I just wanted you to expand more on the government funding package that would help prevent a shutdown.
Well, the truth is, we're not going to get the whole package done by September 30th. Now, I think we should have. The House hasn't passed a single appropriations bill out of committee. The Senate has. And the Senate has been doing their work based upon the deal that the President and Speaker McCarthy put together. So they're abiding by, and in a bipartisan way. I think Patty Murray, the chair, and Susan Collins, the vice chair, have been doing great work. Virtually all the bills passed with very few, I think the most no votes on any single one of the 12 appropriations bills was 4. So the idea that if the House is going to take a little while longer to get all their respective bills passed so we could then do a conference, then we ought to do what's called a continuing resolution so we don't shut down the government. And we've all seen this movie way too many times. People got a right to say, why in the heck can't you get your job done on time? Fair point. I'm not on the Appropriations Committee. But we have also seen the incredible harm done to Virginia. And again, I'll make this comment again. There might be Maryland or D.C. or I'm not sure who else could even be close to being hurt more by shutdown than any other state. But we will take it on the chin, and it will hurt our economy. It will disrupt Virginians' lives. And at the end of the day, it's even going to cost taxpayers more money, because after the Trump 35-day shutdown or 40-day shutdown, we passed a law that says to try to prevent future shutdowns, making clear that our federal employees were going to get paid regardless. So, I support our federal employees, but the idea that they can't work, we see things like delays at the passport office, which we've been desperately trying to fix. You're then going to suddenly say we're going to put a further kink in the system by delaying work going on, still paying out salaries, and making sure, in the case, for example, of people who want to travel internationally, they can't get it done. This makes absolutely no sense.
Senator, our final question will be Joe Thomas. Joe? All right, Senator, that was our last question.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Be good and see you shortly.